Darcy Daniels had heard the whispers all her life, too plain, unremarkable, homely words that cut deeper than any knife could reach. Standing at the edge of Willow Creek with a letter clutched in her trembling hand, she watched the Montana sunset paint the sky in colors she wished she could become. Vibrant, captivating, worth a second glance. It was 1876, and at 22, Darcy had resigned herself to spinsterhood, despite her father's persistent attempts to marry her off to any willing bachelor in Silver Ridge. The letter, sent by her ailing aunt in Copper Canyon, offered an escape a chance to be something other than the plain daughter of the wealthiest merchant in town. "You can't seriously be considering this," her father bellowed that evening, his mustache quivering with indignation. "Traveling alone to that God-forsaken mining town, it's crawling with outlaws and drunkards." Darcy stood her ground, shoulders squared despite the quaking in her knees. "Aunt Martha needs me. She has no one else. And what about the arrangement with Mr. Peterson? He's willing to overlook your shortcomings." Her father's words stung, but she'd grown accustomed to the pain. "Mr. Peterson is 56 years old and has buried 3 wives already. I'd rather take my chances with the outlaws," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. 2 days later, with a carpet bag containing her meager possessions and a purse of emergency funds sewn into her petticoat, Darcy boarded the westbound stagecoach. Her plain brown traveling dress matched her unremarkable brown hair and eyes, the very features that had earned her the cruel nickname Mud Darcy in her youth. The journey was grueling. Crammed between a sleeping drummer whose head kept lolling onto her shoulder and a minister who smelled of stale tobacco, Darcy gazed out at the changing landscape. The rolling hills gave way to dramatic mesas and canyons painted in shades of amber and rust. For the first time in her life, she felt a flutter of something like hope. That hope was short-lived. The stagecoach lurched to a sudden halt on the second day, sending passengers tumbling against one another. "What in heaven's name," the minister began, but fell silent as the door was yanked open. "Ladies and gentlemen," drawled a masked man, his revolver gleaming in the afternoon sun. "We'd be much obliged if you'd hand over your valuables." 3 bandits relieved the passengers of their money, watches, and jewelry. When they came to Darcy, the leader paused, scanning her plain attire and unadorned wrists. "Nothing to declare, miss." Darcy's heart hammered against her ribs as she thought of the money hidden in her petticoat. "And nothing, sir." The outlaw leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. "You sure about that? Search her," he commanded one of his companions. Before the other bandit could lay hands on her, a shot rang out, followed by another. The outlaws scattered, returning fire at an unseen assailant. The coach driver shouted for everyone to get down, but in the chaos, Darcy was pulled from the stage and found herself sprawled in the dirt as bullets whizzed overhead. Through the haze of dust and gunpowder, she saw a lone rider charging toward the bandits, firing with deadly accuracy. 2 outlaws fell, the third fled into the scrubland. The horseman dismounted in one fluid motion and approached the stagecoach, his spurs jingling with each step. "Everyone all right?" he called, holstering his revolver. Darcy stared up at her rescuer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. His eyes, startlingly blue beneath the brim of his Stetson, met hers, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. "Miss, you hurt." He knelt beside her, and Darcy became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, hair falling from its pins, dress covered in dust. I'm fine," she managed, accepting his outstretched hand. His grip was firm yet gentle as he pulled her to her feet. "Name's Flynn Armstrong, U.S. Marshal." He tipped his hat, revealing a shock of dark hair that curled at his temples. "Darcy Daniels," she replied, reluctantly releasing his hand. "Thank you for your timely intervention, Marshal." Flynn Armstrong smiled, and Darcy felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. "Just doing my job, Miss Daniels." His gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary before he turned to help the other passengers. "I've been tracking these outlaws for weeks. The Harlow gang's been terrorizing stagecoaches all through the territory. Once the dead outlaws were dealt with and the passengers settled, Marshal Armstrong insisted on riding alongside the stagecoach to ensure their safe passage to the next town. That evening they stopped at a way station, a humble structure that offered little more than a roof, simple meals, and hard beds. Darcy sat alone at a corner table, picking at a bowl of questionable stew when Marshal Armstrong joined her. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, already pulling out the chair. "Of course not," she replied, suddenly self-conscious about the wisps of hair that had escaped her hasty bun. Flynn studied her with those piercing blue eyes. "Where you headed, if you don't mind my asking?" "Copper Canyon. My aunt is ill," he nodded. "Tough town. Good people mixed in with the rough sort." He took a bite of stew and winced. "Lord, I've eaten rattlesnake that tasted better than this." Despite herself, Darcy laughed. "Is that a common meal for a U.S. Marshal?" "More common than I'd like." His smile revealed a dimple in his left cheek. "You traveling alone?" she nodded, bracing herself for the lecture about proper ladies not venturing west unaccompanied. Instead, Flynn said, "Brave of you. Most women wouldn't dare." "Most women have more to lose," Darcy replied without thinking. Flynn's eyebrows rose, but before he could respond, the stagecoach driver announced they'd be leaving at first light, cutting their conversation short. The next morning, as Darcy boarded the coach, Marshal Armstrong appeared beside her. "Looks like we're headed the same way," he said, swinging up beside the driver. "Got word the remaining Harlow brother might be holed up near Copper Canyon." For the rest of the journey, Darcy found herself watching the Marshal the way he sat tall in the saddle, alert to every sound, how he would occasionally catch her eye and tip his hat with a smile that made her stomach flutter. They arrived in Copper Canyon 3 days later. The mining town sprawled across the valley floor, a chaotic collection of wooden buildings, tents, and mining equipment. The air was thick with dust and the sounds of men shouting, hammers striking, and the occasional burst of raucous laughter from the saloons that lined the main street. "Where's your aunt live?" Flynn asked as he helped Darcy down from the stagecoach, Cherry Street. "She owns the millinery shop." Flynn nodded. "I know it. Come on, I'll walk you there." Darcy felt the stares as they made their way through town, women assessing her plain appearance, men tipping their hats to Flynn while barely acknowledging her presence. It was a familiar feeling, but somehow, walking beside Flynn Armstrong made it sting less. Martha's Millinery sat at the quieter end of Cherry Street, its windows displaying fashionable hats that seemed out of place in the rugged mining town. The bell above the door tinkled as they entered, and a frail voice called from the back room, "Coming." Aunt Martha appeared, a thin woman with silver-streaked hair and the same brown eyes as Darcy. She stopped short at the sight of her niece. "Darcy, is that really you?" Her face lit up with delight before a coughing fit doubled her over. Darcy rushed forward, supporting her aunt to a nearby chair. "I came as soon as I got your letter." Aunt Martha squeezed her hand weakly before noticing Flynn. "And who might this gentleman be?" "U.S. Marshal Flynn Armstrong, madam," he replied, removing his hat. "Just making sure Miss Daniels arrived safely." "Well, isn't that gallant of you," Martha said, her eyes twinkling despite her evident illness. "Perhaps you join us for supper this evening, to properly thank you for your escort." Flynn glanced at Darcy, who felt a blush creeping up her neck. "That's very kind, but I'm sure the Marshal has official business to attend to." "Nothing that can't wait until after a home-cooked meal," Flynn replied with a smile. "I'd be honored, Miss," corrected Martha. "Miss Martha Daniels. 7 o'clock sharp." After Flynn left, Aunt Martha turned to Darcy with an appraising look. "So that's why you came all this way. A handsome Marshal caught your eye." "Aunt Martha," Darcy exclaimed, mortified. "He was guarding the stagecoach after we were robbed, and I came because you're ill." Martha waved dismissively. "A touch of lung fever, nothing more. The doctor says I'm on the mend. She eyed Darcy critically. But you, my dear, need some color in those cheeks. Let's see what we can do before your Marshal returns for supper. He's not my Marshal, Darcy protested, but Martha was already rummaging through a trunk, pulling out a dress in a rich emerald green. Nonsense. I saw how he looked at you. This should fit with a few adjustments. It's last season's fashion, but that hardly matters in Copper Canyon. That evening, Darcy felt like an imposter in the borrowed dress. Her hair, arranged in a style Martha insisted, brought out her cheekbones. She doubted anything could transform her plain features into something a man like Flynn Armstrong would notice, but she humored her aunt. Flynn arrived precisely at 7, hat in hand and a bottle of wine tucked under his arm. He'd cleaned up, his dark hair still damp from washing, and traded his trail-worn clothes for a clean shirt and vest. When his eyes fell on Darcy, they widened momentarily. "Miss Daniels," he said with a slight bow, "you look. That is, green suits you." Darcy felt the heat rise to her face. "Thank you, Marshal. Flynn, please," he insisted. "I'm off duty tonight." Supper was a simple affair, a chicken stew with dumplings, fresh bread, and Martha's famous apple pie, but the conversation flowed easily. Flynn shared stories of his 5 years as a marshal, chasing outlaws across the territories. Martha reminisced about her journey west as a young woman, seeking independence and adventure. "And what about you, Miss Daniels?" Flynn asked as they lingered over coffee. "What brings a lady like you to the Wild West, besides an ailing aunt?" Darcy hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth that she was escaping a life of pitying glances and cruel whispers seemed too pathetic to voice. "Darcy has always been the brave one," Martha interjected. "Even as a child, she'd stand up to bullies twice her size." Flynn's eyes never left Darcy's face. "Somehow that doesn't surprise me." After supper, Martha conveniently remembered some bookkeeping that needed attention, leaving Darcy and Flynn alone on the small porch that overlooked the now quiet street. "Your aunt is quite a character," Flynn remarked, leaning against the railing. "She's the most honest person I know," Darcy replied. "Too honest sometimes," Flynn chuckled. "Must run in the family." The night air was cool, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Montana sky. For several minutes they stood in comfortable silence. "I'll be staying in town for a while," Flynn finally said. "Got to track down that last Harlow brother before he causes more trouble." Darcy nodded, trying to ignore the leap in her pulse. "Well, I'm sure Aunt Martha would welcome your company at supper anytime. And you?" Flynn's voice was quiet. "Would you welcome my company, Darcy?" The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "I would." The following weeks settled into a routine. Darcy helped in the millinery shop during the day, learning the trade from Martha, whose health was indeed improving. Flynn would stop by each morning for coffee, ostensibly to update them on his search for the outlaw. But his gaze would linger on Darcy long after the conversation had moved on to other topics. In the evenings, when he wasn't making inquiries at the saloons or patrolling the rowdier sections of town, Flynn would join them for supper or escort Darcy on walks through the safer parts of Copper Canyon. They talked about everything: his childhood on a Pennsylvania farm, her love of books, their shared dream of one day seeing the Pacific Ocean. "Have you heard from your father?" Flynn asked one evening as they strolled past the church. Darcy tensed. She'd written to inform her father of her safe arrival, but his terse reply had made it clear he considered her decision to remain in Copper Canyon a personal affront. "He wants me to come home," she admitted. "He mentions in every letter that Mr. Peterson is still waiting for my answer." Flynn's jaw tightened. "And what do you want?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. "I want." Darcy hesitated. "I want to not be afraid anymore." "Afraid of what?" "Of believing I'm exactly what everyone always said: too plain, too quiet, too much of nothing special to ever be truly wanted." Flynn stopped walking, turning to face her. In the glow of the lamplight, his eyes were serious. Darcy, whoever told you that was blind or lying?" Before she could respond, shouts erupted from the direction of the saloon. A man staggered into the street, firing a pistol wildly into the air. "Get inside the church," Flynn ordered, already moving toward the disturbance, hand on his revolver. Darcy obeyed, watching from the doorway as Flynn approached the drunk with calm authority. The man swung around, gun wavering, and Darcy's heart seized when she recognized him, the third Harlow brother, the one who'd escaped during the stagecoach robbery. "Well, if it ain't the hero lawman," Harlow slurred, his gun now pointed directly at Flynn. "Been looking for you, Marshal. You killed my brothers." "Put the gun down, Harlow," Flynn said evenly. "Your brothers chose their path, and now I'm choosing mine." Harlow's finger tightened on the trigger. Without thinking, Darcy grabbed a hymnal from a nearby pew and threw it with all her might. It struck Harlow's arm just as he fired, sending the bullet wide. The distraction gave Flynn the split second he needed to draw and fire. Harlow crumpled to the ground, his gun clattering on the wooden sidewalk. Flynn secured Harlow's weapon before checking for signs of life. Finding none, he turned to Darcy, who stood frozen in the church doorway. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, crossing to her in 3 long strides. She shook her head, unable to speak as the reality of what had just happened washed over her. Flynn pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen a person do," he murmured into her hair. "I couldn't let him shoot you," Darcy whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. Flynn drew back just enough to look into her eyes. "Darcy Daniels, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." Before she could protest, his lips found hers in a kiss that stole her breath and scattered her thoughts like leaves in a whirlwind. The death of Jeb Harlow made the territorial newspapers, with Flynn Armstrong credited for bringing the notorious gang to justice. What the papers didn't report was how the U.S. Marshal had fallen hopelessly in love with the plain niece of the local milliner. As autumn painted the mountains in fiery hues, Flynn was called to testify at a trial in Helena, requiring him to leave Copper Canyon for several weeks. The night before his departure, he took Darcy to their favorite spot overlooking the town. "I'll write every day," he promised, holding her hands in his. "I'll hold you to that, Marshal," she replied, trying to smile despite the ache in her chest at the thought of his absence. Flynn reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you, to remember me by." Inside was a delicate silver locket, simple yet elegant. When Darcy opened it, she found a tiny pressed wildflower, the same kind that had been blooming the day they met. "Flynn, it's beautiful," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "Not half as beautiful as you," he said, helping her fasten it around her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin, sending warmth coursing through her veins. "Darcy, when I return, I want to ask you something important. But I need you to know whatever anyone has ever said about you being plain. They couldn't see what I see." "And what do you see?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. Flynn cupped her face in his hands, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "My treasure. Worth more than all the gold in these mountains." He kissed her then, a promise sealed beneath the vast Montana sky. The weeks of Flynn's absence crawled by. Darcy threw herself into helping Aunt Martha with the shop, which was flourishing as more respectable women arrived in Copper Canyon, following their husbands to the increasingly prosperous mining town. True to his word, Flynn wrote everyday letters filled with his longing to return to her and vague hints about plans for their future. Then, in late October, a letter arrived from Darcy's father. Mr. Peterson had died suddenly of a heart ailment, and without the prospect of this advantageous match, her father had decided to sell his business and move east to live with Darcy's married sister. He expected Darcy to return home immediately to help with the arrangements. "What will you do?" Martha asked after reading the letter. Darcy touched the locket at her throat. "I don't know, Father needs me, but your heart is here now," Martha finished for her. She patted Darcy's hand. "Write to him, explain about Flynn. Darcy did, pouring her heart onto the pages, describing Flynn's goodness, his bravery, and the love that had blossomed between them. She posted the letter with equal measures of hope and dread. Her father's reply arrived the same day as a telegram from Flynn, announcing his imminent return. The contrast between the two messages couldn't have been starker, her father wrote. I have never heard such nonsense. A U.S. Marshal with no family name or fortune, I forbid this attachment. Return home at once or consider yourself disowned. Flynn's telegram reads simply, arriving Saturday. Have important question to ask. All my love, F. Saturday dawned clear and cold, the first snowflakes of the season swirling lazily from a pearl-gray sky. Darcy waited at the stagecoach station, her heart hammering against her ribs, her father's letter burning a hole in her pocket. When the coach finally appeared, kicking up dust and snow along the main street, Darcy strained to catch sight of Flynn's tall figure. The passengers disembarked one by one, a traveling salesman, a young couple, an elderly man, but no Flynn. Confused and increasingly worried, Darcy approached the driver. Excuse me, sir, was Marshal Armstrong supposed to be on this coach? The driver scratched his beard. Armstrong? Yeah, he had a ticket but never showed up in Helena, figured he'd changed his plans. Darcy's blood turned to ice. Flynn would never miss the stage without sending word. Something was wrong. She hurried to the telegraph office and sent messages to the marshal's office in Helena and to other towns along the route Flynn might have taken. For 3 days, she waited for replies, each one bringing the same news: no one had seen Marshal Flynn Armstrong since he left the courthouse in Helena over a week ago. On the 4th day, as Darcy was closing the millinery shop, the door swung open, bringing a gust of cold air and a stranger, a hard-faced man with a deputy marshal's badge. Miss Daniels? He inquired, removing his hat. Darcy nodded, her throat suddenly dry. Deputy Marshal Reed. I'm afraid I have news about Flynn Armstrong. The man's expression was grave. He was ambushed outside Helena. Friends of the Harlow gang, we think. The room seemed to tilt. Is he dead? Darcy whispered. No, madam, but it was close. Took 2 bullets, one to the shoulder, one that grazed his head. He's been unconscious at the doctor's house in Granite Springs. Granite Springs? But that's only 20 miles from here. Hope surged through her panic. Is he awake now? Will he recover? Doc says he's got a fighting chance, especially now that the fever's broken. He's been asking for you since he woke up yesterday. The deputy shuffled his feet. I'd have come sooner, but the passes were closed by the snow. Within the hour, Darcy was in a rented buggy with Martha beside her, heading for Granite Springs despite the threat of more snow. The journey was treacherous, the narrow mountain roads slick with ice and partially obscured by drifting snow. We should turn back, Martha said as darkness fell and the snow began again in earnest. Flynn wouldn't want you risking your life like this. I'm not losing him, Darcy replied, her knuckles white on the reins. They reached Granite Springs well after midnight. The doctor, roused from his bed by their persistent knocking, led them to a small room where Flynn lay pale and still, his head and shoulders swathed in bandages. Flynn, Darcy whispered, dropping to her knees beside the bed. She took his hand, alarmed at how cold it felt. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. For a moment, confusion clouded his blue eyes before recognition dawned. Darcy, am I dreaming? No, you stubborn man, she said, tears flowing freely now. I'm here. A weak smile curved his lips. Knew you would be, that's why I had to hold on. Darcy stayed by his side through the night and into the next day, sponging his brow when fever threatened to return, helping him sip water, and simply holding his hand while he slept. Martha arranged for rooms at the local boarding house, but Darcy refused to leave Flynn's side for more than a few minutes at a time. On the 3rd day, Flynn was strong enough to sit up and take real food. As Darcy helped him with a bowl of broth, he caught her hand. My saddlebags, he said. Did they find them? The deputy had brought Flynn's belongings, which were stacked in the corner of the room. Darcy retrieved the weathered leather saddlebags and brought them to the bed. Flynn rummaged through one side, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured shoulder. Finally, he withdrew a small velvet box. "This is why I couldn't die in that ravine," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I had an important question to ask you." Darcy's heart seemed to stop as Flynn opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "I had a whole speech planned," Flynn continued, "about how from the moment I saw you, covered in dust with that defiant look in your eyes, I knew you were special. About how your strength and kindness make you the most beautiful woman I've ever known. About how I want to spend every day of my life showing you exactly how precious you are to me." He took a shaky breath. "But nearly dying has a way of making a man cut to the chase. Darcy Daniels, will you marry me?" Through her tears, Darcy managed to nod. "Yes. Yes, Flynn Armstrong, I will marry you." The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her hand alone. 2 weeks later, with Flynn well enough to travel, they returned to Copper Canyon. A letter awaited Darcy her father's response to her news of the engagement. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal, bracing herself for more harsh words. Instead, she found a brief note. "If this man values you as you deserve, then you have my blessing. Your sister and I will attend the wedding should you still wish us present." They were married that December in Copper Canyon's small church, with Martha beaming proudly and Darcy's father looking uncomfortable but determined in his best suit. Flynn's fellow marshals stood as his groomsmen, and Darcy wore a gown of ivory satin that Martha had secretly ordered from San Francisco. As they exchanged vows, snow fell gently outside, transforming the rugged mining town into a vision of pristine white. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn lifted Darcy's chin with gentle fingers. "I told you that first night you're my treasure," he whispered before kissing her. "Worth more than all the gold in these mountains." Spring 1877 found them in a small ranch house outside Copper Canyon. Flynn had resigned his position as marshal, accepting instead an appointment as the county sheriff, a job with less travel and fewer bullets. Darcy helped Martha run the millinery shop, which had expanded to include a dressmaking service. On a warm May evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Darcy placed Flynn's hand on her still flat stomach. "We're going to need a bigger house," she said softly. Flynn's eyes widened before a grin split his face. He dropped to his knees, pressing his ear against her belly as if he might already hear the tiny heartbeat within. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "You don't know it yet, but you've got the most beautiful, courageous mother in all the West." He looked up at Darcy, his eyes shining with tears and wonder. "How did I get so lucky?" Darcy ran her fingers through his dark hair, remembering the whispers that had followed her all her life, too plain, unremarkable, homely. How strange that it had taken traveling to the wild frontier to find the one man who saw past all that to the woman beneath. "I think," she said, smiling through her own tears, "we found exactly what we were both looking for." As the last rays of sunlight gilded the distant peaks, Flynn Armstrong held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought them together, a plain girl, a lonesome lawman, and the love that had transformed them both.